Hi, my name is Marina Faura, and today we'll be talking about the start of the space race. During this presentation, we'll see what was the space race, when did it start, who was winning, what was the purpose of it, when did it end, Star Wars in real life, and the collateral effects it had on our world. The space race was a rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union in a competition to be the first to conquer space. This happened right after World War II and during the Cold War, as both nations needed to show their technological and military superiority. That political tension can be seen in this political cartoon, published on the British newspaper The Daily Mail, and it shows President John F. Kennedy arm wrestling with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, and they are both sitting on rockets. Its origins can be traced back to the 1930s, when Nazi Germany developed new ballistic rockets that could orbit the Earth. They were the first ones to launch a vehicle to outer space in 1942. In this photo to my left, we can see one of those launches in 1943. However, the idea of rockets, as we know them today, were actually created by Russian scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in the 1880s, and is considered to be the father of cosmonautics. However, the space race officially begins in 1955, when the US announces their intentions to launch an artificial satellite into space in honor of the International Geophysical Year, which was an international scientific competition created to unite both the East and the West during the Cold War. 4 days after the US announcement, the Soviet Union decides to pursue the same goal, and thus the competition began. The first battle was won by the Soviets, as they were the first ones to launch an artificial satellite into space, the Sputnik 1, in 1957. After that first win, there were many others. Not even a month after Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2 was launched, carrying Laika the dog. Laika was the first living being to be launched into space. Unfortunately, she passed away during the flight due to stress and overheating. The following year, in 1958, the US launched their first artificial satellite, which was the Explorer 1, and in that same year they launched 3 more satellites, but one of them failed, while the Soviet Union only launched one more Sputnik, Sputnik 3. In 1959, the Soviet Union launched 2 more satellites, Luna 1, which was the first satellite to orbit around the Sun, and Luna 2, which was the first man-made object to land on the Moon. In 1960, the US made their first weather artificial satellite, and also launched the first camera-equipped satellite. But it was not until 1961 that the first human was launched into space. This was astronaut Yuri Gagarin, sent by the Soviets. However, 3 weeks later, the US launched their first American man into space, which was Alan Shepard. And please remember our name. Remember that name for later in our presentation. The Americans needed to step up their game if they wanted to win the space race. And as an attempt to unite the nation and give hope, President John F. Kennedy gave his famous Moon speech in 1962, in which he promised to reach the moon by the end of the decade.
To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time in manned flight. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade we shall make up and move ahead.
Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman to reach space and would remain the only one until 1982, when Svetlana Savitskaya piloted the Soyuz T-7 spaceship. In that same year, in 1963, President John F. Kennedy proposed a union between the US and the Soviet Union to attempt to reach together the moon. However, due to his assassination and the fact that it is thought that a Soviet man did it, the union was cancelled, even though the Soviets were going to accept. One of the most important achievements in history was the moonwalk of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin of 1969. Although there were 3 people on board, one of the crew members had to stay behind and guard the spaceship, while the other two got to explore the moon. And we all know how Neil Armstrong descended from the ship, stood on the moon, and said his famous phrase, "One small step for a man, but one giant leap for humanity." And although this was a very serious mission, that didn't stop them from having fun. They had a car race, they joked about aliens, and they even had a karaoke night.
Hippity hoppity, hippity hopping over hill and dale. Da 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 da. Hippity hopping.
At first, the space race was a way of showing technological superiority. However, after all the scientific discoveries were made, the goals shifted towards military purpose. The Soviets had lost the race to the moon, and so they focused on living in space. And they were the first ones to create space stations, an armistry for them. Their first long-term stay was in Salyut 1, where 3 astronauts stayed for 22 days. We technically can't say the space race has ended. Some might say it was in 1975, when the US and the Soviet Union were united in one mission to space. They both had their spaceships, and the mission consisted in uniting them to form the first International Space Station. The astronauts bonded, they exchanged gifts, and they even conducted joint experiments, which may represent the end of the scientific rivalry both of the nations had. However, in the decade of the 1980s, a new rivalry started, as President Ronald Reagan called it, Star Wars. Star Wars was a program created by the US government to defend the US from Soviet ballistic rockets that could be launched from the Soviet space stations created during the military era of the space race. If we follow the space race to nowadays, we can see its purpose has yet again changed. It is now a commercial strategy. For example, Elon Musk is preparing commercial trips to Mars along with NASA, for which 30 people have already signed up for, and they are actually training them to build a human colony from scratch. Another example would be the 5G satellites that China is launching right now. Thanks to the space race, there are many inventions that we use in our daily lives. For example, baby formula was a way of long-term food storage and an easy way for an astronaut to cook their food. Other examples would be the laptop, which was made to take huge computers into space, the joystick, which is an easy way to drive an aircraft, and satellite TV, which is basically the #1 entertainment system nowadays. Another collateral effect of the space race was a record-breaking golf shot. Who would have thought? Now, remember the astronaut I mentioned before, Alan Shepard, the first American man to go into space? Well, he was on a mission to the moon in 1971 when he smuggled a golf club into Apollo 14. And on live television, he took it out and 4 golf balls and shot them all. Now, the first one was a fail, but the 3 other shots reached many miles, which is essentially a record-breaking golf shot. Unfortunately, it wasn't really suitable to enter the Guinness World Records.
Houston, while you're looking that up, you might recognize what I have in my hand as the handle for the contingency sample return. It just so happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans. Drop it down. Unfortunately, the suit is so stiff I can't do this with 2 hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. They got more dirt than ball that side. Got more dirt than ball. Here we go again. That looked like a slice to me, Al. There we go. Raise the die. One more.
for watching my Space Tricks presentation, and there's nothing else for me to say than to infinity and beyond.